So the college football playoff field is set now. We've got, of course, Alabama versus Cincinnati. That's your 1-4 matchup. And you've also got Georgia and Michigan, the 2-3 matchup. It's a tough day, though. You know what I mean? Do you? Yeah, I think you do know what I mean. It's a tough day for the expansionists out there because the expansionists saw another one of their lies get shattered. And that lie, of course, was no G5 team will ever make the playoff. Well, I see that Cincinnati Bearcat logo there, and I can assure you, Jesse and Colin didn't put it in there just for entertainment purposes. The Cincinnati Bearcats are in the playoff. Another expansionist myth exposed. And you would think, therefore, that the expansionists are thrilled. They got to be over the moon excited, right? The expansionists should be out in the middle of the street throwing a parade. Because why? Well, because their dreams were granted. They've been turned into a reality now. Of course, by dreams, I mean they're longing for a G5 team to be included. That's what this has all been about, right? The entire premise of needing to expand the playoff is because the G5s, they don't have access. And we wanted new blood. Well, there you go. You're looking right now, if you're watching on YouTube, at the playoff field. I count 2. And out of 4, Stats and Info tells me that is 50% of this playoff field is not only new blood, but mixed within the new blood, you've got G5 blood, that pure G5 blood. And yet all I've seen is complaining from the expansionists today. Why is that? Because they were lying to you all along. Not only were they giving the big lie, which was the G5 is not allowed in the playoff. No, there's a difference between has not been in and cannot be in. That myth has been exposed. But the much bigger myth, and the reason I've always had a problem with the expansionists, is because it's never really been about what they say it's about. Those were some convenient talking points to get you in line with their thinking. All this has ever been about, at the very top of the ladder at least, has been about expansion for the sake of inclusion, merely for the sake of inclusion, which ultimately means a paycheck. Now you may think, oh, everyone says it's always about the money. Well, that's because it usually is always about the money, but that wasn't the trick. The trick wasn't a lot of people with already deep pockets wanting more and wanting deeper pockets. That's happened since the beginning of time. The trick was they had to get you on board. And so what do they say? Hey, guys, help us get richer. Of course not. What they say is, don't you care about the underdog? Don't you care about these poor, innocent G5s left out in the cold? These are kids too. These players have hearts and souls, and they work as hard as those Alabama players. And how dare you support this evil 4-team infrastructure that's going to leave them out in the cold? They pivoted today. And they've long since pivoted once they saw that this was becoming more and more a possibility, and they're nowhere to be found. You notice none of the expansionists were out there really taking much of a victory lap today. In fact, we on Late Kick are taking more of a victory lap than they are because it was on this program. I should have loaded this video up. It was on this very program on July 18th, the year of our Lord 2021, where yours truly, with the endorsement of Jesse and Colin, at least I think so, they didn't tell me they disagreed, we said on this show, and I maintained all year, I never wavered, that if the Cincinnati Bearcats went undefeated, they would be in the college football playoff. Well, friends, fast forward, spoiler alert if you recorded the game yesterday, the Cincinnati Bearcats went undefeated, and they are now in the college football playoff, making it the first time a G5 team has ever made it in. My buddy Parker, misguided though he may be sometimes, he has a good heart, good intentions, but poor takes on the playoff sometimes. I saw him say today on Twitter, he said, make no mistake, no glass ceiling was broken here. The only reason Cincinnati's in is because other teams lost and they had no other shot but to put them in. That's accurate. That is actually true. It's just, I don't get the point. Like, that's always been the path for a G5 team. It's the reason that I said what I said about Cincinnati this year. It was because I thought so many dominoes were going to be knocked down because of the hashtag Renaissance season that there was going to be an open path, at least wide open enough where if a G5 team, in this case Cincinnati, took care of their business, they were going to make it in. Well, one did, and one made it in. That should always be the path for a G5 team. Fact number one, Cincinnati's in the playoff, and I think they deserve to be in this year. Fact number two, no other G5 team's ever made it in, nor, in my opinion, has any other G5 team ever deserved to be in. When we weigh all the criteria, and we weigh, to me, what is pivotal, which is strength of schedule, and the baseline that you need to meet to even be involved in this conversation, and see when we measure the rest of the landscape. You can go back to your Central Florida examples all you want to, or even go back further than that. The fact of the matter, I guess a fact in my opinion, is we haven't had a landscape like this. This is the landscape you needed. Cincinnati got the landscape. let me give you some quick thoughts. Obviously, we're going to do full game breakdowns on both of these. I got to choose which one of these games to go to, so I'm going to need some assistance there. Yes, there is a draw to being in South Florida on New Year's Eve. There's also a draw to being at a game that starts at 3:30 p.m. on New Year's Eve, and I think you know what the draw is for me. I am not a social butterfly like some of you. I would just assume be 35,000 feet over Arkansas when the new year rings in, as opposed to being wherever you guys are going to be in Dallas. So we got to figure that out. We got time. First matchup is 3:30 Eastern time on Friday, December 31st, the last day in the year of our Lord, as it turns out, 2021. I am a believer that there is a perfect atmospheric scientific metaphor, a fancy term for weather, that ties into Alabama being allowed in the playoff. You don't want to allow a vulnerable Alabama team to get in the playoff. You want to blame someone, blame Georgia. They had a shot. Blame Auburn. They had a shot. And they didn't fully take the crowbar to the shin. They just grazed them. And so Alabama limped around, but then they got their footing back and they kicked both of them in the face. Well, now Alabama's in the playoff. And the weather equivalent of this is when you're looking down in the Lesser Antilles, the Caribbean, you got a disorganized low pressure system, but what happens? It gets into the Gulf. And it gets into the Gulf in early to mid-September when it's as warm as bath water and you haven't had any upwelling. Translation, when another system has come through and churned the water up and brought some of the cooler water up to the surface. And so there's just that warm, moist surface layer, and it's a perfect fueling environment for a tropical storm or a hurricane. Well, once an injured Alabama gets through the SEC championship game, and once a vulnerable offensive line finds its way in the SEC championship game, now you let him get into the Gulf, which in college football playoff world is December. Now they've got a few weeks to get healthy, and they've got a few weeks to get Brian Robinson 100%, and they've got a few weeks, and this is going to be crucial. This is one of the biggest points of this game, to get that wide receiver core fixed the way it needs to be with some of those younger guys, because John Mechie is not going to play in this game. He is a great receiver for them, but his hidden skill, and the reason he's on the field so much for him, is he is their best perimeter blocker. You know, he is what a lot of those guys in years past have been. I don't think he's gotten enough credit for that, but a lot of what you've seen Jameson Williams do this year in the open field has been because of John Mechie. So I don't know if it's going to be a Jai Hall. Ja'Cory Brooks has already been on the field. JoJo Earle, according to Nick Saban, may be available in this game. You got Christian Leary. They can get creative with him. That's something to watch here. Cincinnati, hey, I think is better at quarterback than Georgia was. Desmond Ridder is a very good quarterback. Jerome Ford, a former Alabama player, transferred to Cincinnati. He was on my All-American list I filled out today. He was one of the 4 running backs I put on my All-American list. Yeah, I don't know if you guys knew that. I do fill out an All-American list. But here's the thing I want to focus on. Ahmad Gardner, nickname Sauce. You will hear that name. And that's a guy that is going to have maybe, by some opinions, the unenviable task, or maybe, in his opinion, a welcome challenge of trying to man up against Jameson Williams. Now, that is a tall task for anyone. There are some racehorses that I would not like in that matchup. But at the very least, Cincinnati will look at that and they'll say, okay, we're going to make someone other than number 1 beat us. We've got a guy that can greatly help us there. If they cannot fill the void of John Mechie, and maybe if we can limit them running the ball, then maybe we give ourselves a shot here. But the wide receiver depth is what I'm focused on with Alabama the most. What about Georgia? How about these dynamics, by the way? Georgia is playing Michigan. This is the 2-3 game. This is in Miami. It's the late kickoff. It is 7:30 Eastern time on New Year's Eve, and Georgia opens as a 7.5-point favorite. When I mention dynamics, the reason I'm mentioning them is because Georgia finds themselves, as it relates to Michigan, in the exact same spot they found themselves in relation to Alabama last night. The difference is, instead of telling a team for 1 week that you don't have much of a shot, Michigan gets 3 weeks to be told they don't have much of a shot. I've seen Michigan in person 2 times this year. You watched them body bag Iowa last night in front of God and everyone on national TV. I can assure you, Michigan does have a shot against Georgia. Now, what specifically is it going to take? Well, obviously, we'll do that more in our game breakdown. But Georgia, they're going to have to run the ball better regardless of who starts at quarterback. The talking for the rest of December, right on through Christmas, is going to be JT Daniels, JT Daniels, JT Daniels. Are we going to get him ready? Because we can't be putting Stetson Bennett out there. Listen, if you're barely cracking 100 yards on the ground, I don't really care who you have out there. And Michigan is a salty defense. They can get pressure with 4, but they can also limit you on the ground. This is not going to be an easy matchup at all for Georgia. Michigan, when you look at them offensively, I think they've evolved fairly rapidly this year. They kind of had a little bit of an Oklahoma State vibe to them, only Michigan is a better team than Oklahoma State. But both of those teams were getting by early, and then they started to get some margin on teams a little bit later in the year. Oklahoma State still didn't have much of an offense. Michigan's got a pretty good offense. They can have balance. They can achieve real-life balance, not just 50-50 on a piece of paper. But it's all about the response from Georgia. I think this is more about Georgia than Michigan, but I think I am more fascinated by Michigan than Georgia. Response for Georgia. Like I said, when they go in there last night, they know they have a safety net under them. They know they can lose to Alabama. They can still make this game. Yeah, they know all that. But it's still about response, because now there is no more safety net. Now it's do or die. It's playoff setting. And there's as much uncertainty around this Georgia team now as there has been all year. And it's weird that your uncertainty peaks in December, but that's what happens when you don't play a schedule that's built to expose you necessarily. Not saying it was a weak schedule. I'm saying relative to the one Bama played, it may have been weaker. There's some people trying to hate on Georgia's schedule. They played Arkansas. They played Kentucky. They played Clemson. And I can assure you, if a G5 team had played those 3, you would be yelling it from the mountaintops. Georgia played an okay schedule. Not the strongest in the world, but they played an okay schedule. They didn't play quarterbacks or wide receiver units that were built to expose them. Bama did. Now we'll see what Michigan can do. But that external dynamic, the one that we can't quantify, the one Nick Saban smiled and talked about last night in the postgame, that yummy rat poison, as he put it, Michigan gets it for 3 weeks. They get to look, at least right now, at a number even fatter than the one in the SEC championship game. Last night it was 6.5. Now Georgia's favored by 7.5. That's going to be a fun one. There's at least a 50% chance we'll be there. That's going to be a fun one. Those are some early thoughts on the playoff. Be very interested to hear what you guys had to say. Did you notice, as it turned out, there was really no gnashing of teeth today? Everyone pretty much agreed, maybe not in the ordering exactly, but I think most people even agreed in the ordering. And the committee, I'll give it to them, it wasn't that hard to do this year. This makes, every year so far that I think they've gotten the field right. So as much complaining as I do sometimes, the end result I have agreed with. And so I don't have a poster over here like I did for the Nick Saban apology, but thank you, committee. Thank you for that.